We are now proceeding, and we are proceeding with what you could call a tour de force. A tour de force in relation to thematic summaries from the workshops that were held yesterday. And the way we are going to do it is that Anders will now have the role as the walking microphone, going to each of the chairs of the workshops, and each of them will have 3 minutes to make the thematic summaries that you will also see here up at the PowerPoint. So let's begin with the first thematic summary. And this is Maria Slowey.
Thank you. Dia Gwith, which is good morning in Irish. 3 minutes. I think this tests our level of competence as chairs. So going back to the earlier discussion, we had a very lively discussion in Workshop A, stimulated by 3 excellent papers by Professors Klaus Holm, Tako Kami-Bepu, and Richard Desjardins. Our discussion was so lively, we did not have time to complete the task, which is that I should feed back 3 points to the group. So the people who are in Workshop A, please feel free to contradict my level of competence in summarizing these points. So the first issue that struck me was really the importance of multi-levels of analysis in developing and deepening our understanding of complex interactions. In fact, Professor Holm commenced this point by drawing a typology or a mapping along an axis of relatively secure to insecure, relatively stable to changing. And what we discussed was that within each of those cells, we could look deeper at levels of macro, meso, micro levels of analysis. So that was really a plea, and I think for depth and rejection of surface levels of analysis that are sometimes used to support so-called evidence-based policy. Second point was a lot of discussion that we've had over these 2 days, but also in other policy and research fora, about the interaction of education in general, higher education in particular, and employer short-term skill requirements. So we know that this doesn't work, we know it isn't possible, and yet there is still a dominant hegemonic view that it is possible to predict skills and that education should be geared towards those. So again, it's an argument for more sophisticated levels of analysis. And that grew out of some of the discussion about the interaction of vocational higher education and academic higher education in all of our countries. And then the third point, of many other points, was drawn from very interesting empirical research presented by Richard Desjardins, based on PIAC and other case study analysis about the importance of employer support for adult learning, and we can see that increasing in many countries, but yet associated with that are levels of increasing educational equality gaps for adults, because it's those who have the higher levels of education who are more likely to be supported by their employers to engage further. These are the points that came to me. I really would ask any of the colleagues from that workshop to contradict or add their own points, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We also had a challenge to fulfill the task, but it's a cross interpretation I did. We had the workshop preparing educators for the 21st century, and the question on the skills needed for lifelong learning. We could see from research the colleagues have presented that central core competences for adult educators seem to be very stable over time. So not a lot change, and we assume that they will be the same for the 21st century. So it is a core competence or core question for teaching and education to adapt to concrete situations. And we also see that these core competences have to be developed and have to be based on knowledge. So we, I think the big danger, what we have discussed in a group is if you focus on competence, that we are leaving out the knowledge, which is the basis. So competences cannot be developed without knowledge base. If we see, if we have a look on the drivers for change, we heard yesterday morning a lot about the cooperation and relationing of education and economy. We have discussed that it is essential that these relations will be enlarged to all sectors of society, especially to actors of civil society and the state. So we shouldn't think that economy can solve all problems, all issues of society. We should respect that it is a part of society and should reflect how we can interrelate the different actors. And this means that the support of innovative and creative learners, which we heard yesterday morning, it requests for a humanistic understanding of society. So by the end, the people and the learners becoming driver of change, and so to focus the people in the center of change instead of to see them only as functionally adapt people to external changes. If we have a look on 21st century skills influenced by the differences between Asian and European countries, we observed that there seem to be partly, especially in Southeast Asia and in East Asia, harmonistic tendencies to European policies and OECD policies, and this is especially true for the skill approach. But we also saw that we maybe should look very carefully also on the local needs and the local integration of education, that we have to think about the relation of international and global needs, of specific regional needs, and of the concrete local needs of a society, and this, yes, and their interrelations.
Workshop C was on assessment and learning culture. We had 4 presentations, one from Australia, Bulgaria, Philippines, and Spain. And all the presentations were talking about how to make assessment process more interesting, authentic, joyful. And we began the note with the assessment. The word is very frightening and threatening on the part of a learner, as well as on the part of the institutions. Because assessment, when you say, students become very tensed, stressed, and institutions also, because we have the national qualification and assessment and accreditation. But most of the papers we discussed were about how do we assess students' learning outcomes in the institutions. The first was the authentic assessment is very much essential to understand the learning outcomes of the students, as well as the merit of the academic program. we could see the assessment in two different perspectives. One is understanding the learning outcomes, and also to what extent an academic program could fulfill the objectives with which it was designed. And we also talked about the alternative assessment practices, whether it is formative assessment and the summative assessments. What kind of innovative practices can really bring into, therefore, the learning outcomes that we are talking about can be displayed in an authentic way. So the Australian presentation talks about, more or less, you have a paper pencil examinations that we conduct in the university or even the schools, and identified about the most prominent limitations of this paper pencil and the importance of introducing the oral examinations in the universities, and how that oral examination can really talk about the critical and creative thinking of the learners, and that can be used into. He presented the 4 different cases from the discipline of law and discipline of veterinary sciences and theology, and most of the students, they responded that oral examinations are much better, that can cover the wide range of perspectives of learning. Then the presentation that we had was technology-initiated assessment practices. The case from Bulgaria and also the case from the Spain. They have developed about how the plagiarism that we have today, the copying, and that can be minimized, and presented a kind of an academic integrity in the assessment process. See, the Bulgarian model talks about using the biometrics and then making the learner more accountable to the learning process. And that was interesting presentation. Then what kind of assessment tools you use it, and what is the level that you really want to test to the learner. So the Spain's presentation talks about the European successful model, what they have did it on an online tool which was prepared, and what actually you want to test on the children, on the students, in the Bloom's taxonomy, from the knowledge, understanding, application, analysis, and synthesis levels. Therefore, how you put your instruction, therefore, what assessments becomes more appropriate. So overall, it was how technology can be tapped to make assessments more meaningful and realistic, and also how to make this assessment a very happy and healthy practice in the institutions. Thank you.
Thanks, Anders, and thanks very much to all who participated in yesterday's workshop on national strategies. I think we had 4 very good presentations from Italy, Scotland, China, and Japan, and some discussion at the end. Like Maria, what I'm about to say is very much my judgment about the key themes in our workshop, so my fellow participants will feel free to add or contradict things that I say. I think the first point is that as lifelong learning researchers, we have terrific new opportunities for research emerging from big data and from a whole new category of evidence that we've not had a lot of access to previously, that can support all the different aspects of policy formation, policy design, evaluation, advocacy. But we mustn't lose sight of the importance still of other kinds of methods like qualitative approaches, case studies, which can illuminate aspects of the policy process very clearly. The second point was about the importance of recognising the increasing drift or links towards aligning education, adult education with the economy, but continuing to keep a holistic perspective so that we are not caught in short-term traps, but keep a perspective on the longer-term needs of people, society, as well as the needs of sectors like business and governments. And our third point was perhaps a more complex one. It was about, and it's something that came to me just listening to the subtext of each of our presentations, about the nature of skills. Skills is actually a complex concept, and we tend to take it and use it relatively liberally, whereas in fact there's a good deal of ambiguity and uncertainty that runs through what we really are trying to refer to about about skills. And that's partly, a lot of what's entailed in skill is invisible, and especially as contemporary work becomes more abstract. So we need to be ensuring that our national policies are inclusive and that they recognise the importance of having diverse ways of knowing, thinking and doing on our agenda.
Our workshop E touched on some of the changes and challenges the students face in 21st century. And also we defined the learners have active organizer of knowledge, and what we call 21st century skill might have been exist in the past. However, what is important to find and to use and process them. And also it is our role to educate innovative students across the countries by building a common innovation environment. Also, we handle that, the production's viewpoint. We can have, let me see, we can have some, the game applied in the e-learning contents. So e-learning production view is a very practical experience we share together. And also another one point is we haven't shared together the experience of JMOOC during last 3 years. Platform and also technological issue were introduced by our third speaker. So I always thank you for our speaker keep the time, and we shared together very valuable experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. This is from workshop 4, Core Competence for an Unknown Future, which we have also heard about this morning, but we also discussed it yesterday afternoon. We had one point that we wish to share with you. It was a proposal to everyone to use and develop models of partnership between educational institutions and industrial or social partners in order to provide learning experiences, both through work, at work, and for work. We heard a presentation, very interesting presentation from Scotland, from Maria Houston, about a new high education course which was developed together with social partners. We heard from interviews. We had citations from interviews with the students, and that made it very possible for us to grasp the impact of that course. But we also could understand that we need to have also a critical view of our ideas about the unknown future. But what does it really mean that it is unknown? It means that maybe it's not all true for all geographical areas of the world, that the same kinds of work, the same competence demand will be the most common in the future. Some parts of the world will still have many job positions for unskilled workers, we think. The next point was very much in line with Miho's statement this morning. We have to be careful and precise when we use terminology, because meaning may differ between fields, cultures, and institutions. So that's why it's very important that we exemplify and we tell many stories to each other concerning these different concepts, these different terms that we use. That was also very obvious in our discussions in the workshop. And the last thing I would like to put forward here is that students need support and guidance in order to be able to develop self-awareness and personal development. That was put forward in the discussion after the presentation by Saima from Malaysia. She talked about in a very structured way about self-awareness and personal development, personal growth, as one of our proposals to be included in what we think is needed for the futures concerning core competences. We think that it is very important to balance and to integrate self-awareness and personal development into the other core competences that we want to propose. It's not a course in this, but it has to be integrated, and we have to find a good balance between other kinds of competences and this kind of core competence. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen Evans from UCL London, and I was privileged to be the chair of Workshop G, which had 4 excellent presentations on workplace learning and learning spaces in relation to work, focusing on research networks as working environments, on the growth of automated work, on assessment for learning at work, and on qualification frameworks. In the bullet points I've drawn out, as chair, I've tried to focus them directly on the 3 questions that the conference has been organized around. So the first is about defining 21st century skills. We thought the notion of 21st century skills was rather a narrow one, and I think that what comes out of the thinking in this area is that educated attributes are increasingly important, including the critical abilities that people have been talking about in other parts of the conference this morning. The ability to read work and life situations critically and with good attuned judgment is increasingly important in the world of work. And also the abilities that people have to put all forms of knowledge to work. It's not just about acquiring knowledge. It is about putting all forms of knowledge, that is, knowing how, knowing that, knowing why, knowing who even, to work, both productively and in an ethical way. So we need trust at work, not fear at work, in the interests of both productivity and social cohesion. The second point was about drivers, or question was about drivers for change. We had quite a big focus on digital technologies, driving changes in workplace learning, and also driving massive changes in the organization of work with this increasing replacement of routine work. We have to keep very aware that digital technologies enable people to access a wide range of learning resources and make new kinds of connections, but there is also the problem of the digital divide, particularly as regards older workers, but also in regard to many different categories of workers. And then the final question was about differences between Asian and European learning cultures. And I think we feel in our network that these distinctions are becoming increasingly meaningless, actually, as we've done a lot of empirical work in our network, and we found such a huge diversity of learning cultures, both in European countries and in Asian countries. So I think what we want to do here is rise above making these kinds of distinctions and think about keeping these different dimensions of self-knowledge, social responsibility, creativity and innovation in view, and also think perhaps in a more complicated way about the flows of ideas that are going on within Asia, within Europe and across, because this is what is, I think, most interesting, the complicated now flow of ideas that are crossing the different boundaries. And also, just a quick mention, it also depends very much on whether you're talking about the learning cultures as they relate to that part of labour markets that are connected to the global economy, or those parts of labour markets that are linked to the local economy. Again, an earlier speaker also emphasised that local, national, global distinction.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the thematic summaries, the 7 thematic summaries.